Rancher program. And just wanted to clarify that it's not yet open. The RFA for the coming fiscal year has not been released yet, and we don't have a specific date yet for what the deadline is going to be. And this would be a place where if Wesley has updated information, he could jump in. But the last that we've heard, it's going to be a fall release for the RFA like it's been in past years, and deadline probably somewhere towards the end of the year. So we're getting a jump start on this and trying to help prompt people to prepare early. But when some people saw the announcement of the webinar, they wanted to know if that meant it was time to apply, and it's not yet. So that clarification, so people don't get too anxious. The topic, program design, is about helping you to think through what it is you want to do with your grant. And, I do a lot of program design in my consulting practice, and what I like to say is that it's basically a compressed strategic planning process. You're going to put into it all of the different elements of thinking that you would put into a strategic plan for your organization. It's just going to be on a somewhat smaller scale, specific to just what you're going to do with this grant. A program design is basically what your program is, how it works, what results it's going to achieve, how it's going to achieve those results, when, all the pieces that you would see in a kind of a standard logic model, and all of the questions that you see in any federal grant application process. So that's what we're talking about when we talk about program design. It's nothing really, esoteric. It's the concrete nuts and bolts of what you do and, how it works, basically. So that's just a setup to clarify what we're talking about here. Let's see. I'm able to move the slides. Yes. So the BFRDP grant program is different than some of the other programs because it actually has a basic design that's already set up for you. Some of the USDA grant programs are very open-ended. For instance, the Community Food Projects, which is another one that New Entry does the technical assistance for, is pretty wide open. It lets you decide what you want to work on and explain to the USDA how you're going to solve a particular problem. BFRDP has already identified problem, and they've already identified a basic way of trying to solve the problem. So there's some limits in terms of what you can design for BFRDP. The basic structure, the basic idea, design, is that beginning farmers need training, technical assistance, mentoring, and other kinds of support in order to successfully start a farm business or to ensure that they're able to continue farming. So they've already kind of set that for you. And all of your designs are going to fit within that. And here is the long sentence that is in the RFA from last year about what the goal of the BFRDP program is. Like I said, help beginning farmers and ranchers enter and or improve their success in farming. And they list education, mentoring, technical assistance as the methodologies of how to achieve that. And, one basic thing to know about BFRDP is that they are very much about supporting farm businesses and farm operations. And they have a definition of that. It's not a community gardening program. It's about successful farm businesses and beginning farmers being up to 10 years of experience in farming. So we're not going to go too much further into the details on the program requirements right now because there are a lot of resources available for you to do that on your own, and I don't think it's worth your time to read you the RFA or read you tools that are out there. As part of this project, we've developed an online self-assessment tool, which is basically an online survey where you can go through and click yes or no, and it will prompt you to go through all the basic requirements of the BFRDP program. So if you've never applied before, or you've applied and you were unsuccessful and you're questioning whether you have a project that fits with this program, you can start there. We'll be sending the link around in the follow-up email like Kristen mentioned. Last year's RFA is out there, and the farmanswers.org website is kind of the clearinghouse of information that's run by BFRDP. So there's places that you can get more of that detailed information. So I put this together as the 10 essential questions to ask when developing a project for BFRDP, and thought that this would be a good way to just prompt people to get thinking about the program. So the first question is, what do the beginning farmers you serve need to be successful? And this is, of course, making an assumption that you serve beginning farmers, or if you haven't, that you're planning to, which is why you're looking at this program. And ultimately, the main goal is to have a grant that helps farmers be successful. So the first question is looking at what the farmers need. And the other important thing to know here when you're thinking about this program in particular is that BFRDP is very much interested in farmer input and farmer feedback into the program design. So as you're thinking about, what farmers need, you're going to want to be asking the farmers what it is that they need. And I think we put in a little picture here. So this is one of my long-term clients, Minnesota Food Association. They run an incubator program for immigrant and refugee farmers. It's an organic vegetable operation, and these photos are from one of their farmer listening sessions, which they host every summer. They're farmer run. There's no staff at these events, and there are opportunities for the farmers to discuss how things are going in the incubator, things that they need, problems, questions, and then somebody takes notes and shares that back with the staff in a confidential way so that the farmers feel free to give their feedback. And this has been a really successful way of ensuring that the farmers have input into the program design. And the BFRDP application will ask you how you got input from your farmers as you were designing the project. So that's just one idea. There's lots of ways to do it. Second essential question, what approaches have worked for your organization or others doing similar work? So say, in question one, you've determined that what farmers need are, is access to more markets. And they particularly need access to wholesale markets because they direct to consumer markets. So if you've identified, wholesale markets are needed, and you want to start building those markets, the next place to go is to look at what's worked for you or what's worked for others. And at this point, this program has been around long enough that there is a wealth of information out there about successful projects. Those of you who have been funded in the past have probably been to the project directors meeting where you get to hear all the presentations. And there's lots of information in that farmanswers.org clearinghouse. And you can also look up, past projects, read their reports. You can get directly in touch with other organizations that have either been funded by this program or are just doing something like what you would like to do. So starting to look at, what would be good strategies for how to achieve the goal you've identified. On that same note, what is not working and why. So, as you're looking at your program, you're going to look at both, what you're currently doing, assuming that you're already, have some experience in this area, and, what you want to add on to that and why. And it's really important, I think, at the beginning of your program design to think about things that have not worked for you or for your farmers, because that's another place that you can identify what's needed and also some innovative things that you could try. I think that, you know, we're often hesitant as nonprofits and especially as grantees to really focus too much on our weaknesses. We're really encouraged to write reports that highlight our successes and make sure that we tell our funders that, you know, everything's going great and the farmers are doing well. But it's really an important part of the design process to be honest with ourselves internally of like what's happening here, and are our farmers coming out of this program and being able to farm successfully, and what does that mean successfully, and you know, are they staying in farming, and if so, how long, and are they making the kind of you know, income that they need, and they're getting out of farming, why? You know, just really taking a look at these questions. And that's part of the reason why we wanted to start with this webinar so early, because these are kind of bigger questions. And of course now it's summer, and so you're probably all really busy with the farm. But as you're doing your farm work, you can keep these questions in your mind and with your farmers to just observe how are things going, you know, where are the big stress points, and what are things to jot down on the list for what we could change to make it better. Strategies you'd like to try out, I mean, this is again kind of the same thinking. You know, say your farmers have been talking for years about, we would really love to try doing, you know, an aggregated CSA and having multiple farms supply it. And we've always wanted to do this and we've never been able to. USDA grants can be a really excellent opportunity to try something new because you have additional resources that are going to be coming with the grant, and it's an opportunity to have that support from USDA and from other grantees as you try out something new. Let's see here. So as you've gone through the first few questions, you have a couple things that you want to try or things you want to change. What you need to do next is really think through the resources you're going to need to do these things in a very realistic way. So for instance, you know, we gave the example earlier of new wholesale markets. If you're going to approach a new wholesale market, do you have a refrigerated truck? Do you have, you know, the contacts that you need to, you know, get to these markets? Are your farmers going to need some kind of additional resources and support? Do you have cooler space? Do you have that you need? I mean, there's all kinds of different areas of resources, as you know, in farming. There's so many different categories of the type of resources that go into making anything successful. So material, financial, human resources, all of those things are important, and you could start making a list of those. And then another key requirement of the BFRDP program is collaboration. So in addition to having the input from beginning farmers themselves, BFRDP requires now that your application is a collaborative project. And you need to have a few good allies as you go into the application process. And they need to be people that you can work with well and that you trust, and that you know are going to be able to carry out the grant with you. This is a really big topic, partnerships, especially with USDA grants. And so we have a whole other webinar that's going to talk about partnerships specifically, and that's our next webinar in July. So we'll go into that in more detail, but at the point of the program design, you want to be thinking about, you know, the obvious, who you've worked with in the past, who you know are going to be game to sign on with you right away. And then you also want to start thinking about what kind of partnerships you'd like to have or you would need to have with any new design elements, and start reaching out to them, because this part of the grant, the securing the partnerships and getting those clear, is one of the most time-consuming parts of the whole process. And you need to start it very early. You know, it's going to involve a lot of detailed negotiation and discussion. So get ahead of it if you can. So 7, what can you realistically do with this grant? This is so essential, and it's really easy for nonprofits, especially smaller nonprofits that have limited resources, to overreach when you go for a grant, especially a federal grant. The BFRDP program now has 2 sizes of grants. They have the small standard grants, and then they have the large standard grants. They have different grant amounts. And they've done that to really try to make the competition a little more fair so that smaller organizations are not competing against, the university extension program that has a lot more resources. So first of all, being realistic about which category you're going into, and there's more on that in the RFA. But then second, really being realistic about how much money is involved in the grant. And then, of course, you have to factor in that there's a match requirement for this program of 25%. And again, we're going to have a whole other webinar on matching funds because that's a very complex topic in and of itself. So that webinar is in August. But, keeping in mind that you are going to be required to put in your own resources, too, when you get funding from this program. And this is really where you think about balance. So you have your list of the things you're doing now that you, of course, want to continue doing because they work. Then you also have your list of things we'd love to do because we know the farmers need them, and, wouldn't it be great if? And you have to take those 2 things and kind of look at, okay, how much can we actually do here? And it's a real balancing act between supporting current successful activities and bringing in new activities at the same time. And that list that you developed for question 5 about your resources, what resources are needed, that's going to line up here too in looking at that. Just one thing I'll say, so in my practice, I've done all of the proposals I mentioned, but I also do project management consulting for organizations that receive a grant, and I do a lot of evaluation and then just helping organizations implement their project. And so I've seen what happens after the grant gets awarded and then over years of implementing projects. And one thing that really comes up a lot is that people did not plan realistically for the time it's going to take just to manage the grant itself. So if you've had a federal grant, you know this. If you haven't, you need to know that federal grants are different than grants that you get from a small foundation. It's coming from the government, and therefore there are a whole lot of requirements for financial accounting and reporting and accountability that you don't have with some of the smaller funders. And you really need to plan staff time to manage those things, or you will end up being stressed out by having the grant, which is not what we want. What makes your project unique and innovative? So, taking that balance between your current activities and then your new activities, people sometimes can be pulled towards having too many new activities and trying things they've never done because there is this push to have a unique project and to have your techniques and your strategies be innovative. The main reason we have to think about this, well, there's 2. One is that the program requires it and will ask you to explain how your program is unique and innovative. The other is that this program has become increasingly competitive. So here's kind of a layout of, some years back of the BFRDP program, how many people applied and how many were funded. I mean, it's a little bit of a bell curve going up and then back down in terms of the success rate. But, you can see that there are a lot of applicants to this program. It's a national program, and it's very, very competitive. So, it is going to be important to distinguish your project from other projects. And as this program gets more competitive, the reviewers are going to be looking more for, kind of who's on the front lines of thinking through current problems and trying to solve them rather than a lot of repetition of, we've been doing exactly the same thing for 10 years, obviously you build on your strengths, but you also have to really look at that. And there's no real secret answer to that, I don't think, but it's just something you've got to weigh. Question 9, how does this program fit with the broader mission of your organization? This is another just kind of realistic question. I do strategic development consulting, and so I help organizations as a whole think about what they're doing and how to improve it. And I think that because federal grants are big projects and they do require a lot of resources, staff time, and management and preparation, it's really important that whatever your program design ends up being, it has to fit with the mission of your organization. Some of you, this is going to be no problem because the whole mission of your organization, like New Entry, is to support beginning farmers. So therefore, this is an obvious fit. Others, you've got maybe multiple components of what you're doing in the food system, or maybe you work completely outside the food system in other areas, or there's a new activity that you're proposing and you have to think about how it fits with everything else that you're doing. It's an opportunity, like I said, it's a strategic planning opportunity that helps review, helps you review what are you currently doing and what do you want to do, and make sure that that makes sense. And this is also a place to make sure that you have buy-in from your whole team and everybody at your organization that's going to be involved with implementing the grant. Now, the last thing you want to have is a grant that gets awarded and then it's going to be, a struggle the whole time because certain people on the team just didn't buy into the design, or if you have a finance person, your finance person didn't understand what their requirements were going to be for reporting or whatever it is. So have a team conversation as you're getting ready. And our last question is, are you ready for a federal grant? And this really is, it's the theme, I'm sure you can tell from a lot of these questions. Of course, these are amazing opportunities. And, I'm sure all of you, you're working in the food system, you know this, but I've been telling all my clients we need to be aware this is the last year of the current Farm Bill. So fiscal 18, starting this fall, that will be the last year that this program is funded through the current Farm Bill. And there's a big negotiation process already starting, and there is a lot of advocacy happening to keep this program either funded at its current level or to get increased funding. But of course, we don't know what the future is going to hold. And, this is a good year to apply for that reason. However, that's going to probably mean a lot of people are applying, so it will be competitive. The first year that I wrote a federal grant was 2012, which is actually fiscal year 13. And the project design that I put together got rated very, very highly. However, it came back because the Farm Bill got put on hold due to negotiations over the budget. So it is a process that can be politically impacted. There's that. And then there's the internal pieces, like I was saying, managing a federal grant is a time-consuming process. The BFRDP program in particular has done an excellent job with making the reporting process as clear and simple and straightforward as they can. They have started with a new reporting system this year that everybody I've heard from has said is much easier to use, but you're still going to be doing very detailed reporting, and detailed reporting means detailed record keeping as you go along with your activities, and financial record keeping, and all of those other things. There's also the application itself, and that's not really the topic of this webinar. New Entry has an existing webinar on the application process that we'll share as well that shows you all the pieces of the application. But, just shorthand, if you haven't done one, it's a big commitment. it's a couple of months of work at a minimum, and you know, ideally you're starting much earlier than when the RFA comes out. So starting now for this coming fall to think through these things, put your partnerships in place, you know, all of those different aspects. So that's the big question. Are you ready? And then these are the upcoming webinars, two of which I mentioned. So July, we'll be talking about collaborations and partnerships and what goes into those for the BFRDP program. August, budgeting and matching funds, including just how to think about what the match requirement is and how to meet that requirement. And September, we'll talk more about evaluation and ways you can set up evaluation of your grant that are, you know, both manageable and actually helpful to you, hopefully. So I think that's the end of our slide. So we'd like to open it up for questions on this topic. And of course, if you have questions about the other topics for these other webinars, you know, we'd encourage you to make a note of those and then come to those webinars. It is a little hard to separate them out into completely different topics because they're all interrelated, but that's the idea. And so I think we've said, Kristen, people can raise their hands, this little hand button on your screen to speak and talk your question, or you can also write your question through the chat box, and then we will be happy to answer them.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Allison. So like Allison had mentioned, we have those two kind of ways to ask your question. I did see one question come through during the webinar, which is, who are the reviewers and what are their qualifications? That came from Teresa. I believe that's in regards to who's reviewing the proposals. And then I see a few more questions have come through, but we'll start with that one for now.
Well, I think this would be a good place for Wesley to jump in if he's on.
Yeah, not to put you on the spot, Wesley, but if you are able to answer and maybe provide a little bit more insight or information about who the reviewers are. I know, you know, a panel of reviewers is sort of put together each year. Let me see.
Well, you get Wesley on there, Kristen. I could say just generally, I mean, there will be a little bit of information in the RFA about the review process. There's also information in there about the review criteria. You know, the NIFA program, so BFRDP is under the NIFA, National Institute of Food and Agriculture, which is a department within the USDA. These programs are set up for a professional review panel that is kind of internally selected. So it's different than like the peer review panels for, say, the farmers market promotion program. Looks like Wesley has pitched in that the reviewers are generally former grantees. Hi.
So if everybody can hear me, this is Wesley, and the reviewers are, well, first off, each single proposal is reviewed by somebody with, we want to have a farmer, or farmer, rancher, forester, you know, somebody with the correct, you know, on-the-ground experience. We want to have somebody with extension background, and we also want to have somebody from an NGO. So we distribute the review across those three kinds of reviewers, and we make an effort to have a large number of possible panelists so that can be representative of those sorts of reviewers. So you asked about who are the reviewers. You asked who are the reviewers. That's one way of describing them. You know, we're also very careful to make sure that the reviewers fit a number of other criteria. We want them to be spatially diverse. We want, we want geographical diversity. We want racial and ethnic diversity. We want institutional diversity, not just NGOs versus universities and researchers, but also we like to make sure that the different kinds of universities that are represented are also diverse. Make sure to have representatives of 1890s, of Hispanic serving institutions, we make sure to have a number of veterans on the panel, and we also make sure to have representatives of Native American institutions on the panel. And, I think that might cover it. Each year we usually recruit amongst former grantees as well. I think that's it. Great.
Thank you so much, Wesley. Thanks for chiming in. We really appreciate that. And sorry for the technical difficulties.
It's okay. That's a very small technical difficulty.
Great. So the next question we had come through is, how is BFR different from community food projects? And I guess just for me to, quickly, broadly describe the difference. So community food projects is focused on more of a wider variety of different kinds of projects that are geared towards, resilience and self-reliance in communities in regards to their food systems. So that could involve all sorts of projects beyond just beginning farmer training, whereas BFRDP does have that more narrow focus on those beginning farmer and rancher training programs. Any further clarification there?
Not on my part, no.
Yeah, I think that's the main distinction. The next question is, do you have any advice to submitting a pilot project to this program? Feedback we've gotten from USDA is that a proven track record would be helpful, but if we're starting something new, any advice there? I guess I'll say, just from my sort of interpretation, in regards to showing a proven track record, I think, if you have programs that you've been running and programs that might be related to sort of show how you are helping perhaps some of the same constituents, would be great to provide that kind of organizational background and information, even though it might be a new project around beginning farmer training more specifically. So I'm just trying to make sure I'm addressing your question appropriately here. Yeah, so that is how I would take in terms of the proven track record, just kind of showing why and how you are positioned for success for this particular new program or project.
I agree with that, Kristen.
Oh, thanks. Great. And so the next question here is, what are the exact times and dates for the upcoming webinars, or are they listed somewhere online? We are actually sorting out the exact times and dates presently, and we will be sure to post that on our website and share that with you all, perhaps even by the time that we'll be sending the follow-up email after this webinar. Hopefully later today or early tomorrow, I believe we'll be able to include at least the July date and time for the upcoming ones. So yes, those will be listed on the new entry website, and we'll be sending out the information to our email lists. And another question, I think again about BFRDP and CFP. Can you apply for both with an overlap? It's my understanding you can't you would have to be, they would have to be distinct and separate projects that were funded. There can't be overlap with two federal grant programs funding the same activities.
Correct. We do not fund duplication of effort.
Thank you. Next question is, do any common errors or pitfalls related to the project design and application come to mind? It's a great question.
I can answer that. And then Kristen, also it looks like maybe we have someone raise their hand as well, Jake Overgaard here. So let's make sure we get both hand raising and written questions. I think common pitfall would be not thinking through the project realistically. I think that's actually a really widespread problem. So, you know, the reviewers are going to be looking for that as well, to make sure that your budget and your timeline and your work plan and everything else, the way that it's laid out, that it looks achievable and realistic. So, you know, there's always this balance between, you know, wanting your project to have as big of impact as you can, but then also understanding that, you know, first of all, there's no way you're going to be able to serve 500 farmers with one-to-one assistance. Maybe you could reach 500 farmers at a conference, but you can't provide in-depth service to 500 farmers. So, you know, I think that being realistic would be the most common pitfall that I've seen.
Great. It looks like that was Jake Overgaard's question.
Okay.
Yeah, Jake, unless you had another one, feel free to go ahead and raise your hand again there. We had another question here that came through the chat box asking, are capital investments allowed in the BFRDP program?
There is an allowance for equipment, but nothing that is construction, and Wesley can correct if I'm wrong here, but so you are allowed to use some funding for equipment purchases, but they have to be specific to the project, and you cannot use the funding for any kind of construction at all. And we will also go into more detail in all the budget requirements in the budget webinar, but is that correct, Wesley?
Yes, correct.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.
The next question is Extension a required partner, and in what capacity should the collaboration reach? To what degree should they be involved? So Extension is not, is it my understanding that it's not required to have them as a partner. They certainly can be and could be a great partner for a lot of different projects. And then in regards to the capacity for that collaboration, you know, I think in a lot of ways it depends on the project and the kind of role that they are going to be playing. There's also some financial distinction if you're going to be allocating any amount of subaward to a partner, a project partner, then that implies a certain level of collaboration that might be more than, I don't know, a different kind of partner or collaborator in your project. So yeah, in regards to what degree they should be involved, yeah, I feel like it's not a great answer, but it sort of depends on the project itself and how much of a role they're going to be playing, how much, you know, how big of a chunk of the actual like project activities and deliverables they're going to be in charge of. And then I think a follow-up question about the capital investment was, what about drilling a well? So yeah, I think again, there is some potential allowance back to that capital investment. Yeah, as Allison mentioned, we will be hosting another webinar that will get a bit more in depth in some of the budget questions. Yeah, so I don't have more specifics about well drilling in particular, but I think that would kind of fall into that capital investment category.
Yeah, I believe so as well. Don't think that particular capital investment has come across my desk, but I'll drop an email to my more experienced colleague, ask him, let you know, Kristen, and then it will be part of our next. And then you know, for that particular webinar, you can use it as an example.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you.
Okay. I'll send that email right now.
Great. So those are all the questions I have seen come through. Taking another scan to see if anyone has raised their hand or submitted a chat question. Feel free to send in any additional at this time as we kind of wrap up here. And if you have any questions after the webinar today, feel free to reach out to myself or Allison. We've both left our contact information for you here. So yeah, still haven't seen any additional final questions come through. Actually one other question came in. Will the presentation be available online? And yes, it will be posted to New Entry's website. So it will be available there as well as emailed to anyone who registered or attended today. Okay, well, thank you again to everyone who was able to attend this webinar this afternoon. As we mentioned, we'll be sure to send out information and details about upcoming webinars with the topics and specific dates and times as that gets confirmed for later this summer. I want to give a huge thanks to Allison Goin and also to Leslie Bean for chiming in and helping out with some of these questions. We greatly appreciate it. So with that, thank you all very much, and we'll be sending out that follow-up email shortly. Be sure to take the survey to provide your feedback, and we hope to see you again on another webinar in the future. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kristen.